I call this principle the doorstep rule. Stated simply, it reads, "My rights end at your doorstep, yours end at mine." This means I must learn to respect the boundaries that separate us. Put another way, I am not allowed to enter into your physical or psychological space unless you give me permission to do so. I hasten to add that this is probably the most violated principle in all of human history. This principle is simply a restatement of the Golden Rule, versions of which can be found in most of the world's religions. That is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is about creating clearly defined boundaries between people and nations. It is fundamentally about respecting and honoring differences in all their guises. We do not do this well. Nevertheless, by respecting boundaries, this facilitates dialogue across great difference on delicate issues that matter. Now let's take a look at the root cause from a different angle. It was once part of the script that Zionists didn't steal the land because Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. Ever heard this? This particular phrase has been the subject of much heated discussion. It has been interpreted by many to mean that Palestine was such a land and that therefore it justifies the creation of a Jewish state on that site. A book was published in the early 80s which supported that view. From time immemorial by Joan Peters appeared to be an impressively documented work that justified the Zionist position. I quote here from an early review of the book by Daniel Pipes. He wrote, "In 1939, Churchill challenged the common notion that Jewish immigration into Palestine had uprooted its Arab citizens. To the contrary, according to him, so far from being persecuted, the Arabs have crowded into the country and multiplied." The book was received in the United States by incredibly positive reviews. Reactions in Great Britain were another matter, as the following review attests. So we go now to Avi Shlaim, who was a participant opposite Melanie Phillips in the Intelligence Squared debate. This is a quote from his review of the same book. The book said that there were no Palestinians in Palestine until the Zionists came along and made the desert bloom. And then the Palestinian people began to arrive in Palestine. It was a book that was of no value whatsoever. It simply recycled very old and stale Israeli propaganda. But it was a book that American Jews wanted to have, because it completely whitewashed Israel. There is another way of interpreting this phrase, however. It stems from, according to Hannah Arendt, the founder of Zionism's approach to addressing anti-Semitism. Theodor Herzl saw the creation of the Jewish state as the answer. He believed that a people needed a state, and that such an entity would legitimize them in the eyes of the world. He felt this way because Jews could never be considered bona fide residents of any state or country in which they lived. Jews, then, from this perspective, could never be considered French or British or Spanish by the mere fact that they were Jews. Whether one agrees with his thoughts is another matter, but according to a growing number of analysts, this was his view. It was this classification scheme that he believed was the source of anti-Semitism. The way out? Create a Jewish state. Palestine as a state did not exist. Since there was no state in Palestine, that is, no official governmental organization or structure, there then could be no such entity as a Palestinian people. In that sense, the Palestinian people did not exist. At one point, Golda Meir, on air, said to Alan Hart, "There is no such thing as a Palestinian. It was not as though there was a Palestinian people and we came and threw them out and took their country away from them. They did not exist." She retracted her statement after her death in this manner, and I quote Alan Hart, "Even though Golda's statement represented Zionism's official line on the matter, a line that was accepted and repeated parrot-like by Israel's unquestioning supporters everywhere, she had her personal assistant deliver a clarification immediately following her death. She told me to tell you that as soon as those words left her mouth, she knew they were the silliest damn thing she ever said." Perhaps, for Theodor Herzl, the doorstep rule did not apply. That, after all, was the tenor of the time. The particular nature of the traumas that Jews experienced mitigated against consideration for the native population of Palestine. Did we, after all, not do the same thing in the United States? Here is an early map of the United States which details the territory occupied by the various Indian tribes. Suffice it to say, we did not honor their territorial boundaries at all. To make matters worse, did we not characterize the American Indian in much the same way you hear the characterization of the Palestinian Arabs in the scripted view of this conflict? To underscore the point, let me quote Winston Churchill's remarks to the Peel Commission in 1937. "I do not agree that the dog in a manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place." Churchill's views were not out of sync with the times. This was, after all, a period when the phrase master race had some credibility. It followed the colonial period, notions of social Darwinism, and manifest destiny, etc. To illustrate, it would be some time before negative stereotypes of the American Indian would go out of style, and before apartheid would come to an end in South Africa due to world pressure. Remember that blacks in America at one point were considered by some to be subhuman, so it was perfectly acceptable to discriminate against them or enslave them. And when did we finally come out of our egocentric state of ignorance? The 1960s revitalized the process begun during the Civil War 100 years earlier. I should also add that it was the American Jewish support for the black cause that played a critical role in overcoming the bias and prejudice that had too long been the norm.